Hey y'all, my name is Ashlee Jaye. I am the founder of Black Birth Central, which is the #1 online hub for holistic pregnancy, birth, and postpartum information for Black mamas, and also an online directory of Black birth workers like doulas and midwives. I am really excited to start posting videos about different things around birth, really virtual blogs, right? Or video blogs. I've been posting blogs on the website a few times a month, and it's so hard for me to do that. Like, it takes so much work to write the blog, to verify it, to pull in statistics and information, but it's a lot easier for me to talk. I love to talk. I love public speaking and engaging with folks. So I feel like this was a more natural way to do it. And so I will try to have my notes beforehand to still include all those statistics and stuff, and where you can find those statistics, and also make sure that your transcripts are available in blog form on the website along with the link, the video. So in this video, I want to talk about 5 things or 5 principles that I really stand on when I talk about birth, when I talk about maternal health, right? So those things include 1, that birth is natural; 2, that birth is safe; 3, that birth is intentional; 4, birth is a rite of passage; and 5, birth is a mother's responsibility. So first, birth is natural. And this kind of really connects to the safe part, but I'm gonna break them up. So in the US, we really focus on we see birth as a medical condition that needs to be fixed. And really, hospitals are set up for emergency and high-risk births, right? And so if most of the births are taking place in that type of setting, they're being treated that way, even when they're low risk. And so instead of looking at the birth from a perspective of this is a natural process, that how do we support that process or make sure that it stays on the natural course or journey, as opposed to how do we fix every little thing that makes us uncomfortable about this process? How do we make it as convenient for us or for the providers as possible? Right? It's a totally different perspective, and you get totally different results. Also, when we think about birth being natural, literally we've been giving birth for hundreds of thousands of years, for centuries on centuries, and we're not extinct, right? And so it's a process that we as humans did not create, and therefore we don't have to fix, right? Now, there are some exceptions. There are some things that come up that do need to be handled in a different way, right? But those are rare. Most births are low risk. Most births can be hands-off, right? Pregnancy and birth. This is not to say that medical interventions, that hospitals, all those types of things don't have a place in the birth process. They absolutely do, right? When there is a situation that we have an emergency, or someone has a condition that makes birth or pregnancy more risky, right? Then absolutely we should step in and do whatever we need to do to keep the risk at bay, right? To make sure that that mommy and that baby is safe. And sometimes that means a C-section. Sometimes that means some type of medicine or extra tests, right? But that's not the case across the gamut. When we think about the numbers, right, we are in a maternal health crisis, but that's not because most women are dying in birth, right? Or most women are having really bad experiences in birth. It's because the amount that are experiencing those negative outcomes, it's preventable, right? And the fact that we have so much knowledge, so much research, and so many resources at our fingertips makes it even more head scratching that we're having these types of issues. So in the US, right, on a yearly basis, there's almost 7 million births, right, every year. Out of those 7 million births, less than 700 women experience death or morbidity, some type of emergency complication, right? And many of those are preventable. But you have 700 over here versus 7 million over here. The odds are in your favor. And that's because this is a natural process. That also rolls us into the next pillar, right, or principle for me, is that birth is inherently safe, right? Now that's, again, it's not the case for everybody, but when we look at it statistically, over 90% of the births that are taking place, really 99% of the births that are taking place, end in a healthy mommy and baby, right? Now there are other things that are part of this process, people's autonomy, people's voice being heard, those types of things that need to be addressed and that are wrapped up in the concept of the maternal health crisis. But if we just look statistically, right, and when we think about what is safe versus what is not, birth in and of itself is an inherently safe process, right? What is not safe is how we handle the process, how we intervene in the process, and how we make it unsafe. Stick a pin in that. We're gonna go deeper into that in another video. The third pillar for me is that birth is an intentional process, meaning it's not unpredictable. I don't know why people have this idea that birth is unpredictable and that you can never tell what's happening or what's going on. That is not true. That is a lie. It's a myth, whatever you want to call it. It's just flat out not true. As a birth worker, I've been doing this work for almost 10 years. For 10 years, not even almost, for over 10 years, I've been in the birth field, right? In the maternal health field. And when people are telling me their birth stories, I can almost always predict what they're going to say next, especially if it's a situation where they were induced or they had an epidural, right? It's pretty predictable. Some other things that are like intentional about this process, it's such a cool process to learn about, and it's really made me respect God, the creator, in a totally different way, right? Because when I think about like, oh my goodness, leaves and grass, and there's so many different versions and so many different kinds, and there's the way that it takes in sunlight and photosynthesis and all those things, right? It's just like, and then when I was introduced to the birth process, how birth works and all the things surrounding it, it's mind-blowing to me because the process is just intentional. So for instance, when babies are born vaginally, they go through the birth canal and they pick up some of the bacteria that their mother has in their bodies and in the birth canal, right, in the vagina. And those things are the building blocks of the baby's immune system, right? To help the baby like build their immune system along with breastfeeding and breast milk and all that. But that's a whole nother story. Stick a pin in that. Another example of this is when a mother's perineal or the Kegel muscle, right? The muscle in between the butthole and the opening to the vagina, right? When that muscle is intact, there has not been an episiotomy. As the baby is coming out, it presses on the baby's chest and forces the baby to spew out the liquid that's in their esophagus, in their lungs, right? And sometimes when there's medicine involved in that process, or if there's been a cutting of the Kegel muscle, right, like an episiotomy, then that process doesn't happen, and then there's a need for the suction. But there's like the Lord thought of everything. Literally, the Lord thought of everything in this process. The next pillar, the fourth pillar, is that birth is a rite of passage. There have been accounts, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the idea of twilight birth, but in the 60s or 70s, they were knocking women out essentially, or giving them, like putting them in a room by themselves, tying them down, giving them this medicine that was supposedly making birth painless. Really what it was doing was just making them lose their memory of that moment. But during twilight birth, when women were experiencing twilight birth, one of the things that a lot of them talked about is feeling disconnected from their child because they went to sleep or they started the process pregnant and then they woke up and had a baby. They did not go through that process of like feeling the contractions, of feeling all the things, feeling the baby come out, seeing the baby, touching the baby, hearing the baby, actually going through that transition from being pregnant to being a mother with a being outside of themselves. And so in my mind, right, birth is a rite of passage where you go from being a woman to becoming a mom. And it doesn't X out the idea that you're no longer a woman, now you're just a mom. No, it's an additional badge, right? But it's as if you went from student to principal, right? Like there was no in between. It was like you graduated from 12th grade and then you are the principal. And it's like, wait a minute, right? It's a psychological like shock, because it's like, what about all those things in the middle that prepared me for this place of now being a principal? It's the same thing in my mind in this process of birth, right? Going from being a pregnant person is a transition in of itself, right? Going from being a woman to a pregnant woman, and then from a pregnant woman to a mom who has a baby to take care of, right? There are a lot of hormonal changes, mental changes, psychological changes that take place in the process of birth, that when we interfere in the birth process, we also interfere in that transition of becoming a mother. And lastly, a pillar that I often talk about when it comes to birth is that birth is a mother's responsibility. And what do I mean by that? This is not me saying that if you have a traumatic birth, if you experience anything negative, if there are, I don't know, if you end up with a C-section when you were planning on a natural birth, that it's your fault. That's not what I am saying at all. At all. When I say that it's your responsibility, what I'm saying is you are in control. This is your process that you get to control. You get to choose where you have your baby. You get to choose who is there, who is present, who helps you through that process, right? Whether you have a doula or a midwife or an OB/GYN, right? Like that is your choice, and the results of those choices or lack thereof, right, are now results that you have to live with, right? So if you just get an OB because it's the one that the insurance assigned you or suggested to you, and you take it, right? And then this OB disregards everything that you care about, that they just are not in tune with you, and your birth plan goes out the window and you end up with a C-section, right? That's not on you, but you have to live with those results, right? You have to live with the results of now having a C-section scar. You have to live with the results of now having a harder postpartum, right? And so in knowing those things, take the power back. Don't give up your power, right? If you have to live with the results, then you should be the one making the decisions, right? Or at least collaboratively having those decisions and saying yes or no, or let me think about it, or whatever, right? Like it should not just be I'm just going to do whatever this person says. Because at the end of the day, that person gets to go home and they don't have to take care of this baby. They don't have to nurse you back to health. They don't have to, live with whatever results is of this birth experience that you've had. You do. So you should be a part of that decision making, right? So those are the 5 pillars that I want to leave with you today, that I teach families, that I come from in my mindset, that birth is natural, birth is safe, birth is intentional, birth is a rite of passage, and birth is a mother's responsibility.